Pixar, an animation studio renowned for pioneering the field of 3D computer animation. For decades, Pixar has been the pinnacle of animated features, with complex narratives, compelling and emotional characters, and unique modes of storytelling. However, in the past decade, it seems as if Pixar's grasp on the animation industry is weakening. While once a pioneer in technology and narratives, Pixar has now seen itself surpassed by other animation studios who had only previously lived in its shadow. To understand why Pixar is seemingly losing its touch, we must first understand how it came to gain it in the first place. In the 80s, computer animation was very primitive, mostly just geometric shapes and patterns. Many critics and viewers heavily doubted that a character rendered through computer animation could be expressive or emotionally investing. With the release of The Adventures of Andre and Wally B, and more iconically, Luxo Jr., Pixar's legacy was cemented. Audience members were blown away not only by the technical capabilities, but the storytelling as well. After its premiere, director and creator John Lasseter was approached by Jim Blinn, a computer scientist, who instead of asking about the software or technical aspects of the film, simply asked Lasseter whether the big lamp was the mother or the father. Pixar's incredible ability to make computer animated characters that seem to think and have emotions was groundbreaking. The world could not wait to see what they would do next. Pixar's first feature-length film would be released nearly a decade later with Toy Story, released in 1995. Toy Story was 80 minutes long and entirely computer animated, which made it the first of its kind. The endeavor did not come without its difficulties, though. If Toy Story did not become a success, it was very likely Jobs would disband Lasseter's division altogether, solely focusing on technology. Luckily for Pixar, Toy Story was bigger than anyone could have imagined. The film was released to resounding praise from both critics and audiences, garnering one review by the Los Angeles Times as a captivating first step along animation's most promising new frontier. The film made $41 million in the box office, and even today, nearly 30 years later, the film still stands among the lifetime world gross of $365.2 billion and has a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. No one had ever seen what Pixar was doing before, inventing, innovating, and growing at such a rapid rate. How did Pixar make Toy Story such a hit? Taking a look at production, it's clear to see how the economic pressure was immense and impacted almost every decision made. Before Pixar, there was no precedent for industry practice when it came to 3D computer animation. No one knew its value, how it would be received, or how the production process would even work. Filmmakers doubted that you could get such good aesthetics from a computer-animated film, such lifelike characters with hyper-realistic textures, all culminated by the storytelling potential of animation. A case study on Toy Story from William Schaefer explains how Toy Story is distinguished from all other CGI productions merely by its ability to illustrate and render explicit what is implicitly already at stake in all other CGI productions. Toy Story involves an attempt to produce old ways of seeing and representing by other means. Following the success of Toy Story, Pixar kept the hits flowing with the releases of A Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles, as Pixar remained on top of the computer animation industry. It seemed that every film they produced would become a cultural icon with glowing reviews. Through this decade of prosperity, the Walt Disney Company handled the film's marketing and distribution. Profits and production costs were split equally, but Disney exclusively owned all story, character, and sequel rights and also collected a 10 to 15% distribution fee. In Disney's eyes, Pixar was a seemingly endless cash cow, which is why in 2006, Disney finalized their $7.4 billion purchase and acquisition of Pixar Animation Studios from Apple. By the time Disney had bought Pixar, the rest of the competition, such as DreamWorks, Sony, and Blue Sky, had gained similar notoriety, yet Pixar could still be identified as cream of the crop amongst them. Pixar has always known difficulty and adversity, though, so some new competition couldn't hurt them, right? Well, maybe it was just timing, but the first film that Pixar experienced failure with was their second installment heading into the new decade with Cars 2 in 2011. Pixar had been on a consistent streak of producing unique and deep narratives with emotionally complex characters for over a decade, but many audiences felt that Cars 2 seemed to lack this trait. Leah Rosen, reporting for The Wrap, explained how Cars 2 exposed that Pixar is fallible. The timing of this flop could not have been much worse for Pixar either, as many other animation studios had been steadily gaining notoriety over the years and were releasing some of their best works, such as Rio, Rango, and Puss in Boots. It seems that after this point, Pixar was never really able to regain their superiority over the market. Let's not confuse reputation and success, though, as Pixar went on to make billions in later releases such as The Incredibles 2, Finding Dory, and Toy Story 4. Jumping to 2022, we can see the state Pixar is currently in. On June 17th, Pixar released Lightyear, the fifth movie in the Toy Story canon. The story followed the iconic space ranger Buzz Lightyear, but not the toy. Rather, the film is framed as the movie that Andy saw that inspired him to buy the original toy in the first movie. Confused? So were audiences. This can be understood through the existence of interpretive communities or audience groups that created fan-favored interpretations of films and franchises. The interpretive community that watched Lightyear likely grew up with the original franchise and its cast of characters. But in this film, the familiar setting and recognizable characters are absent. The film was also framed differently from previous Toy Story films, being a sci-fi action movie instead of the typical coming-of-age, friendship-centered films that Toy Story interpreted community were also used to. As a result of this, many fans did not enjoy the new film because it was not, in their eyes, a Toy Story film. Lightyear, as it currently stands, has a 74% on Rotten Tomatoes. Likewise, the film underperformed at the box office, making only $50 million in their opening weekend and netting a subpar worldwide gross of $218 million. Deadline Hollywood calculated the film lost the studio $106 million. One critic from the IndieWire wrote, "Lightyear remains firmly stuck in the past even as it hurtles towards the future. It's hard for movies to sell us on living in the moment when every scene feels like it's settling for less." For many, the film was just too much of the same. It relied too heavily on studio and franchise recognition rather than pushing the boundary as Pixar had been idolized for doing decades ago. What seemed to bother audiences most about this film was just how underwhelming it felt as a Pixar-branded movie and how it signified the company's growing degradation. In contrast, other animation studios who had previously existed in Pixar's shadow had an extremely successful 2022. The most glowing example of this was DreamWorks Animation's films Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which released on December 21st. The film seemed to become an instant hit amongst audiences and critics alike, though only making an underwhelming $12.5 million in its opening weekend. Growing discourse around the movie drew more and more audiences in. As of now, only 5 months after the release of the film, it now stands with an incredible lifetime worldwide gross of $483 million and a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. So how did this film, which is also a spin-off of a popular animated franchise, do so much better than Lightyear? The answer comes once again in comparing the film's two visual and narrative styles. What's most striking in Puss in Boots was its unique visual style. Using new technology, DreamWorks focused more on a painterly style design to make the film look more like a fairy tale world, different from what it was in any previous Shrek films. In contrast, Lightyear chose to once again play it safe, with the same character and environmental designs they had been using for decades. That is not to say the visuals were not aesthetically appealing to view, but more so that they remained unchanged and underwhelming from what audiences had grown to expect in the expanding field of animated movies. Unlike with Toy Story and other earlier Pixar films, the production of Lightyear was under no financial pressure, its filmmakers unafraid of sinking the company with a failure of a film. This comparison is also exemplary of Pixar's faltering narrative storytelling. While Puss in Boots was lauded for its poignant subject matter, Lightyear was criticized for its lack of originality. Much like their visual styles, Pixar's narrative have also remained largely unchanged and reduced down to simple formulas and cliches, leaving most audiences disappointed with the final product. While this could be attributed to many audiences aging out of the studio's demographic, the pattern emerging in Pixar's narratives within their more recent films make it clear. This growing dissent against the studio is impacted by more than just nostalgia. The problem comes from within the studio itself. For the past 30 years, Pixar has risen from humble beginnings to one of the most well-renowned and decorated computer animation studios in recent history. However, following the trend of its more recent films, Pixar appears to be relying more and more on their prestige over the creativity that made their films so special to audiences to begin with. Pixar Animation Studios is too blinded by their past success to see the current trends of animated features. If they do not begin to adapt along with the rest of the industry, then the Pixar touch very well may be lost forever.